All right. So, are you looking to expand into Amazon's international marketplaces? And you've heard about this remote fulfillment, NARF. What is this? Well, my name is Kevin, and I help successful 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers expand into international marketplaces. And I get this question quite a bit. So, if you're wondering what is NARF, it is the North American Remote Fulfillment Program. It's kind of a little bit of a mouthful there. And what it is it basically you use your inventory in the US to fulfill into Canada and Mexico. So this is, if you're having this question, you are certainly not alone because I get this quite frequently. So here's someone named Shannon who she's been selling in Canada, located in the US as a second market, but now with the remote fulfillment with FBA, should I ship to Canada and sell FBA in Canada or just do remote fulfillment? In remote fulfillment with FBA, is Amazon taking all of the taxes, duties for Canada? What are the pros and cons? That is a great question, Shannon, and we will go ahead and get into that. So I'll go over the pros and cons here in a moment. So just to make a quick distinction here, NARF basically is, or remote fulfillment, depending on sometimes how it's phrased. Basically, you've got your local inventory in the US, and then when a customer purchases from Amazon.ca or Amazon Mexico, what happens is the order is actually fulfilled from your inventory in the US. Sounds great, right? Because you can get some incremental sales, and anytime you can get incremental sales, I'm all for it. Just a quick little disclaimer, I am not selling in the NARF program right now. I'm looking to potentially do it in Mexico, but just to go over real quick some pros and cons. It is a great way to test out Canada and Mexico. I know a lot of people who do. So even though I said I don't, I still know quite a few people who do. Because especially Mexico is one of those where it's not as easy to get registered. Technically, you have to have what's called a RFC ID. It's something in Spanish. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, even though I did take Spanish for 4 years in high school. But I will say this RFC ID, you really have to have like a local company. And so people I know who sell successfully in Mexico, oftentimes what they've done is actually worked with a lawyer in Mexico to set up a Mexican company. And so I think anytime you set up another entity in another country, you are taking on a whole new level of complications. So there is that to keep in mind if you wanted to do FBA. So NARF would be a great testing ground because you don't have to worry about the tax part. Now, Canada, if you're doing FBA in Canada, basically your inventory that you have in Canada, you'll be shipping it into Canada, but you have to have some registrations. The registrations are actually pretty simple. You can use your US-based LLC. So that's one of the reasons why I think sometimes it's not as good to do in the NARF program for Canada as a long-term solution. But to test it out, it's great. So I know it's kind of a long-winded there about testing it out. It can be great for large catalogs. So I have a service where I help people on the FBA side of things. And I have a client who basically he has over 10,000 SKUs. Now you may be saying to yourself, that's insane. And he's a private label seller, not a wholesale seller. So you don't hear that very often from private label sellers, but he's in apparel. So, think different designs, different fabrics, different colors, different sizes. So between, color size variation of all these different things, that adds up pretty quickly. So for him, to try to figure out what's going to sell the best in Canada could be an inventory logistics nightmare. Whereas if you have, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 SKUs, testing out a handful of them at a time using FBA inventory might make more sense. Or if you thought, maybe 10 of them were going to sell really well and the other 40, let's say if you had 50 SKUs, those other 40 won't sell quite as well, then, maybe it would make sense to do the other 40 in the NARF program. And, the nice thing is you're going to add sales. So again, if anytime you can add additional sales is a good thing. Now, just a quick little disclaimer, anytime we talk about sales and sales potential, we're always talking about hypotheticals here. So you will never know, nothing is guaranteed until you actually try. Now, again, one of the pros, which I didn't put on here of NARF, is it's a little less risk because you don't have to spend as much time and you don't have to worry about inventory logistics. So there is that benefit. And you could get an additional, from what I hear people, because again, I'm not in the program, but what I've heard from people say is maybe another 1 or 2% of sales. So again, for very little work, you might as well. I mean, it's like if you get offered it, it's not a bad thing to consider. Now, there are some cons, there are some hidden fees, which I'll go over. I've got some examples here in a moment, as well as, you pretty much without fail, and you'll see why here in a moment, will pretty much always get better sales when you have local FBA inventory. So we'll get into that here in just a second. So I was looking down at something. Now, the thing of it is your ranking in buy box, for some of the reasons we're going to show you here in a moment, can be substantially better when you're when you have local inventory, especially with Canada. I think Canada is a good place to be sending stuff in, especially if you don't have a huge catalog and you're not trying to decide which ones make sense to the Canadian marketplace. Whereas I do think that there are some factors that could affect your ranking and buy box adversely on the NARF program. So there is that to know. So just real quick, we'll share what is Amazon actually saying about the remote fulfillment program. So you can see here, they talk about you can increase sales by expanding your customer base to Canada and Mexico. I agree with them 100%. That is fantastic. Amazon handles fulfillment across the border. So you're using your FBA inventory from the States. And import duties and fees are paid by the customer. So that's one there. It sounds great. And we'll get into kind of some of the pros and cons here in addition, which I think will make more sense when we go over them here. So as we are going through that, what I would like to just point out here is I have this as an example of someone I found in a Reddit discussion. Now, granted, this is one person's experience, so can't say that necessarily everyone's going to have the same experience, but I have heard similar things. And so what they pointed out is that they were doing about 400 units a month in Canada, selling FBA. So they had local inventories, the way it sounds, the way they phrased it there. And they are now doing about 30 units a month, or at the time when they wrote this post, which is about a year prior to now. But that's not uncommon based on some of the numbers that I've heard float around. So, with NARF, you might get another 1 or 2% bump. I don't know what this is comparing to their US sales, but 400 units a month is what they were doing. Because I've heard a lot of times, oftentimes people say like, okay, NARF is about 1/10 of what the sales are for folks who are selling FBA inventory locally, which makes sense. And you can see a little bit more reason why that is. So there is no free lunch. So it may sound great because, you as the seller don't have to worry about custom fees and duties and all that, but there is no free lunch. So the customer, they might have it advertised to them that the product is going to cost them $25.93 is the way this person phrased it. And I think this is a good way they phrased it here. And that on top of that, when the customer goes to purchase the product, they find out, by the way, you're also going to have to put a deposit of $5.10 for import fees, which they might get a little bit of that back, or they might have all of that going, in addition to extra shipping fees. So as the customer, all of a sudden your $26 product is now an additional almost $15 more. So you thought you're going to buy something for about $26 Canadian, and now it's going to be about $40 Canadian. So it kind of makes things not as good. So you can see why I was saying that it could have an adverse effect on ranking and buy box, because, I would, and this is more my opinion here, not based on experience, but based on kind of looking at the situation. It doesn't make sense for a customer to say, I'm going to buy that and be as likely to buy it as something that, was prime, and they would get it in a day or two, because, they live near a fulfillment center and they have prime. And so Canada is a very prime marketplace, just like the US is, or I should say another way, the customers are very accustomed to prime shipping and the benefits of that, not having to pay additional costs for shipping and imports and all that. They just kind of expect to, press a button on their phone, and at the price that originally they saw, maybe plus tax, but that gets delivered to their house. And so this person said that they'd be reverting back to FBA shortly. So that was interesting. Now, as a seller, when you look at the fees for remote fulfillment, Amazon does put out there, they are transparent, that there are higher fulfillment fees to account for the cost of cross-border fulfillments. So, for example, this is the chart they had there on, and I'll have a link down below so you can check that chart out if you'd like to see what the fees are for remote fulfillment. And this is and it'll make more sense here in a moment, but the terminology and the, using pounds, that is a very US marketplace thing. So the terminology they're using here of, what tiers you're going to pay for shipping are all using US terminology. So I will compare that to what you would be paying with Canadian FBA fees if you had local FBA. So for example, if you sold a product and in NARF, and let's just say the product is, I'm going to use 1 pound or less, because pretty much everything I personally sell is going to be in that large standard 1 pound or less. And so, you can, again, I'll have the links down below. You can do comparison on your own, but in order to convert that to what that actually looks like for comparison with Canadian, and just to compare, that's also Canadian dollars, not US dollars. So just want to make sure we're transparent on that. But if I want to compare it to what a Canadian FBA fee would look like, I got to also account for what is that in metric. So 1 pound, just mentally know, is 400 and we'll call it 454 grams. So as long as it's under 454 grams, it's going to be a pound. Now, their tiers in Canada, which I'll have linked down below as well for theirs, is for the similar one would be 250 to 500 grams. So basically, as we saw before, as long as something in the US was less than a pound, then it's going to be in that less than 500 grams, because you could even go slightly more than a pound in shipping weight and still be in that 250 to 500 grams. Hopefully that makes sense. But there, the fee is $5.57. And this is all Canadian dollars as well. So let's compare that. So if you had the NARF FBA fee for let's just say the same product, $8.38 Canadian, and the local FBA fee is $5.57. That means the difference is $2.81. So that means you're paying an additional $2.81 for NARF. So that's going to cut into your margins. And to compare that, because unless you're living in Canada, chances are, comparing it in US dollars, because I know a lot of people watching this are in the US, or a lot of people, that are international, that are watching this and aren't in Canada, might be helpful to compare with US dollars. But the difference of $2.81 Canadian is about $2.20 US. So what does that mean? That means you as the seller are going to be eating $2.81 out of your margins. So that cuts into it. So you'd have less sales and less margin. So again, if it's one of those things where, you have these kind of like, let's say, long tail products, these products that don't move a lot, it could be worth it to test it out. But if you have products that are selling, pretty decent sales, very quickly the numbers start to make more sense for doing FBA. Is it worth trying NARF? Yes. Will I probably be doing NARF here in the next few months for at least Mexico, if not Canada, I've got maybe 20 SKUs that I'm not selling in Canada right now. Maybe it's worth it to try those, just to at least do a case study. I should probably do that, and we'll do a follow-up. So hold me accountable to that if you're watching this in the future. Hey, Kevin, how is that case study going along? And another thing I didn't put here on the cons is sometimes people get invited into NARF and they get into the program, but their products, for whatever reason, Amazon doesn't want to be involved in shipping it across the border. So they are no longer eligible, essentially, for the or maybe they'll say it another way. They're eligible for the program, but their products aren't eligible to be shipped across the border. So Amazon denies all of their individual SKUs. So they're not really in NARF. Whereas as long as you get it into the into the fulfillment center, and it's something you can legally sell in Canada, which by and large, for the most part, if you can sell it in the US, chances are you can sell it in Canada. There may be some other additional hoops you have to jump through. But if you're considering at all selling in Canada, I highly recommend doing FBA. If you're doing Mexico, I would at least start off with NARF. Now, if you're thinking about, hey, I'd like to get started in Canada doing FBA, and you understand there's a few hoops you have to jump through, although they're not really all as challenging as sometimes it can feel. But if you need just a little bit of help figuring that out, you can actually head on over to CanadaChecklist.com. You can sign up for my free resource, which will walk you through step by step how you can grow your own international empire, starting off in Canada. It'll walk you through the steps step by step. And I know people who have actually used that checklist and have told me that they've used that successfully to grow their business into Canada. So I'd love to hear about your results. If you have experience in the NARF program and you're like, Kevin, it's not the way you're describing it, you have a different experience, pros, cons, whatever, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you are not subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing, as well as hitting that like button so it helps the algorithm know that this is something that is benefiting folks. So thank you so much, and I wish you the best in your e-commerce journey.